In 1990, a team of archaeologists broke through a sealed section of the Colosseum's underground network. They were looking for drainage systems. What they found instead stopped the excavation for 3 days. Small chambers, stone benches, iron rings anchored into the walls at specific heights, waist level, floor level, above the head. And on the walls, scratch marks, not tools, not graffiti, fingernails. Someone had tried to dig through solid stone with their bare hands. The archaeologists called in a historian. She looked at the chambers for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "These rooms weren't built for storage. They were built for people, specific people, kept in specific ways, for specific purposes." The iron rings told the story the ledgers didn't. Above these chambers, 50,000 Romans were cheering. Below them, in the darkness, women from the edges of the empire were waiting. This is the part of Roman history they don't teach in school. Not because it's disputed, because it's documented. By Roman writers themselves. Carved into the walls of the most famous building in the world. And by the end of this video, you will never look at the Colosseum the same way again. To understand what happened in those underground chambers, you need to understand how Rome turned human beings into inventory. This wasn't random cruelty. This was a system. Bureaucratic, efficient, and completely normalized. When Roman legions conquered new territory, Gaul, Judea, Britannia, Germania, they didn't just win a battle. They processed an entire population. The process was the same every time. Men of military age sent to die in mines or arenas. Children, separated, sold to slave markets across the empire, never to see their families again. Women of childbearing age, designated as captivae. War prizes, property of the state, not metaphorically, legally. Under Roman law, these people were no longer legally human. They were classified as res, things, the same legal category as furniture, as livestock. A Roman official named a commentarius, a record keeper, would assign each woman a number and a category: Germanica, Britannica, Parthica, origin, approximate age, physical condition, entered into a ledger, filed. Then came the march. Hundreds of miles in chains, past the ruins of the villages they'd grown up in, past the graves of the men who'd tried to stop this from happening, into Rome, into the machinery. The historian Josephus, writing about the aftermath of the Jewish revolt in 70 AD, is unusually direct about the purpose of this system. Rome didn't just take women as a byproduct of conquest. It took them deliberately, strategically, to send a message to the survivors. The message was simple: resist Rome, and this is what happens to your daughters. Beneath the Colosseum, beneath the arena, where tourists now take photographs, was a vast underground network. The Romans called it the Hypogeum, the underground. Elevators to lift animals to arena level, tunnels for moving gladiators unseen, cages for lions and bears and crocodiles brought from the edges of the empire, and in one specific section, away from everything else, a series of small chambers, purpose-built, maintained, part of the operational budget. These chambers were small, 10 to 15 square meters, stone benches along the walls, built at a specific height, iron rings anchored at multiple levels, floor, waist, overhead, doors that locked from the outside. Modern archaeologists who study these rooms use careful language. They describe them as holding facilities with distinctive architectural features. What those features were designed for doesn't require much imagination. And the walls. In several chambers beneath amphitheaters across the empire, Capua, Pompeii, the Colosseum itself, archaeologists found scratch marks on the walls. Not tools, not graffiti written deliberately. fingernails. Someone had tried over and over to dig through solid stone. The stones remember what the ledgers forgot. Now let's talk about the men who moved through those tunnels. Gladiators existed in a contradiction Rome never fully resolved. They were simultaneously the lowest and highest members of society, slaves with less legal status than a dog, and celebrities whose names were graffitied on walls by adoring fans. Ancient graffiti from Pompeii calls one gladiator the sigh of the girls, another the glory of the ladies. Women of the aristocracy were obsessed with them. There are documented cases of noble women sneaking into gladiator barracks, bribing guards for private encounters. The gladiator Sergius apparently had affairs with multiple married patrician women, causing enormous public scandals. Even stranger, their bodily fluids were commodified. Gladiator sweat was collected after fights, mixed with olive oil, and sold as an aphrodisiac and beauty treatment. Think about that level of celebrity. Enslaved men whose perspiration was bottled and marketed to the upper classes. But Rome lived in constant terror of these men. The Spartacus rebellion of 73 BC was burned into Roman cultural memory. 78 gladiators escaped, raised an army of 70,000, and nearly brought Rome to its knees. For 2 years they humiliated legion after legion. When Rome finally crushed them, they crucified 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, one body every 40 meters, 200 kilometers. A forest of crosses stretching from Rome to Capua. That trauma never left the Roman psyche. So how do you control incredibly dangerous, incredibly valuable men who have legitimate grievances and the combat skills to act on them? You use a combination of brutal punishment and calculated reward, extra food, prize money, the promise of freedom after enough victories. But the sources hint at something else, something more primal. After a particularly impressive victory, particularly during the major games, funded by the emperor or wealthy senators, gladiators who survived and fought well were given what ancient sources vaguely call victoris privilegia, the privileges of the victor. Roman writers mention this in passing, like it's too obvious to explain in detail. Martial, Juvenal, later sources. When you piece together the references, a pattern emerges. The process appears to have been chillingly bureaucratic. An arena administrator, a ludus official, would escort the gladiator down into the Hypogeum, still wearing his armor, still covered in the blood and sand of the arena, through tunnels lit by oil lamps, past animal cages and mechanical lifts, to a specific section of holding cells. A guard would unlock the designated cell. The door would close and lock again. What happened next isn't described in explicit detail in surviving sources. The architecture tells the story the text won't. One Roman writer, whose name is lost but whose work is quoted by later historians, put it plainly. The victor claims his prize in the same manner the empire claims its provinces, by right of conquest. This wasn't a crime. It wasn't even viewed as morally questionable. It was part of the operational budget of the games. The same administrators who scheduled animal fights and maintained arena equipment handled the logistics of this system. When archaeologists first excavated beneath the Colosseum in the 19th century, they were primarily interested in the engineering, the elevator systems, the tunnel networks, the machinery of spectacle. They found what they expected. And then they found the chambers. These rooms fit no obvious logistical purpose, too small for animal storage, too specialized for general holding, but their features were consistent across amphitheaters across the empire. Capua, Pompeii, The Colosseum itself, the same stone benches at the same height, the same iron rings at the same positions, the same doors that locked from the outside. This wasn't improvised. This was standardized infrastructure. The most disturbing evidence comes from Capua, the same city where Spartacus launched his rebellion. Archaeologists found scratch marks on cell walls, some in Latin, others in languages from across the empire, most fragmentary, but a few legible. One written in crude Latin by someone clearly not a native speaker, translates roughly to, "I was Amelia of the Brigantes. I saw my children killed. Now I am nothing." Another in what appears to be Celtic, "To any god who listens, let me die before tomorrow." These aren't the voices history typically preserves. Roman chronicles name emperors and generals. They don't record the names of women cataloged as property. But the stones remember. The ledgers that survived are almost unbearable to read. Each woman assigned a number, a category, a condition assessment. Female Germanic, approximately 20 years, good health, assigned to Colosseum holding. Not a name, a number, not a person, an inventory item. The same bureaucratic efficiency Rome used to build aqueducts and roads, applied to human beings. The poet Martial, writing in the 1st century AD, documents the arena's midday entertainments with disturbing casualness. He describes prisoners forced to reenact mythological scenes. A man dressed as Orpheus led into the arena with a lyre. A bear was released. Martial notes, almost disappointed, that this time the music didn't work. He's writing this as a review, as a compliment. Here is what the architecture tells us. Above, 50,000 Romans cheering, senators, merchants, children eating honeyed dates. Below, a system designed with the same precision as the arena machinery. Chambers with specific features, ledgers with specific categories, administrators with specific responsibilities. The spectacle on the sand was only the half of it Rome wanted you to see. The other half happened in the chambers beneath your feet, in the moments after the crowd's roar faded into silence. In 1990, when the archaeologist who led the excavation published her findings, she wrote, "The architectural evidence is consistent. The literary evidence is consistent. The pattern across multiple sites is consistent. What these chambers were used for is not in serious dispute among specialists." The dispute, she noted, is only about whether to talk about it. Most prefer not to. History is almost completely silent on their individual experiences. We don't have diaries, we don't have testimony, but we can reconstruct the nightmare from what we know. These women weren't random prisoners. They came from specific moments of absolute loss. When Rome crushed a rebellion, the aftermath followed Roman military procedure. The battle ends, the village burns, men of fighting age, killed or enslaved, children separated, screaming, gone, women, chained together, marched. For a woman in this situation, the journey to the arena was already a descent through multiple circles of loss. You'd watched your village burn, seen your children torn from your arms, been chained to dozens of other women, and marched hundreds of miles, stripped, examined, assigned a number, locked in a cell beneath the greatest monument to the civilization that had destroyed everything you knew. The waiting was its own form of torture. You could hear everything. The roar of the crowd above as people you might have known were killed for entertainment. The cheers when a gladiator delivered a killing blow, and you knew you would never leave. There was no ransom system, no prisoner exchange. Rome didn't negotiate with the conquered. Your people back home, if they survived, would never know what happened to you. You would simply disappear into the machinery of empire. Roman law provided no protection. You couldn't appeal to magistrates. You weren't legally a person. You couldn't even commit suicide. One of the few escapes Roman culture sometimes respected, because if you managed it, you'd be depriving the state of its property. You were res, a thing, and things don't have the right to choose. The historian Josephus, writing after the Jewish revolt of 70 AD, makes the strategic purpose explicit. This wasn't a byproduct of conquest. It was the point of conquest. The humiliation of conquered women was a deliberate policy, designed to break the spirit of resistance so completely that future generations wouldn't dare to think about defying Rome. Resist, and this is what happens to your daughters. There is one moment when the system accidentally became visible. In 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus attended games in Antioch that included female fighters. Something unexpected happened. The Roman audience jeered, shouted, treated the entire event as an obscene spectacle. Severus was reportedly mortified, not by the violence, by how publicly his fellow Romans reacted to it. So, he banned women from fighting in the arena. Think about what this tells us. The problem wasn't violence against women. The problem was that the violence had become too visible, too public, in a way that made Rome's self-image uncomfortable. The abuse didn't stop. It simply returned to the darkness where it had always primarily operated. This system didn't end with a moral awakening. The games continued for centuries, even after Rome officially converted to Christianity. The last recorded gladiatorial combat happened in 404 AD, when a monk named Telemachus jumped into the arena to stop a fight and was torn apart by an outraged crowd. Only then did the emperor permanently ban gladiatorial combat, but even that didn't end everything. The infrastructure remained. The practice faded not because of ethical evolution, but because the Roman Empire collapsed. The machinery of conquest stopped, the supply dried up. The institution died from lack of resources, not from conscience. Today, tourists visit the Colosseum by the millions. They take photographs in front of magnificent arches. They marvel at ancient engineering. Tour guides talk about gladiatorial combat and animal hunts. Most never mention what happened in the chambers below. The stones are still there. Those iron rings bolted into the walls haven't rusted away. The scratch marks from desperate fingernails are still preserved beneath centuries of dust. The ledgers that recorded human beings as inventory items are stored in Vatican archives and museums across Europe, available to anyone who wants to read them. We're not talking about a few isolated incidents. This was policy. This was infrastructure. This was normal. Those voices, the ones that weren't supposed to be preserved, the ones Roman chroniclers didn't think worth recording, are still there. I was Amelia of the Brigantes. I saw my children killed. Now I am nothing. She carved those words not knowing anyone would ever read them. She carved them anyway, because she had nothing else left. No name in any record, no grave with any marker, just those words pressed into stone. 500 years after the last emperor fell, after the last arena went silent, after the last ledger was closed forever, she is still here, and now so are you, and the darkness has not overcome it.